Welcome to our monthly Charter School Investor Podcast, What Charter School Leadership Looks Like. Each month, we meet with leaders in the charter school sector to better understand how they land the plane while it's still being built. Our guest today, Dr. Celeta Watson, Superintendent, RISE Academy Charter School in Atlanta, Georgia. Dr. Watson has degrees from Grambling State University, Savannah State University, and a doctorate in education from Liberty University. Given the turnaround that Dr. Watson has executed in the past year, our discussion today could very well be entitled Rise from the Ashes, because RISE is the name of her school and all that. And as you'll see, it's been quite an interesting journey. But before we start, I wanted to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Herbert J. Sims. From single-site charter schools and CMOs, from expansion to startup, H.J. Sims delivers innovative and flexible capital solutions that meet our clients' evolving needs through their financed right approach. Now, we'd like to introduce our guest, Dr. Celeta Watson, the Superintendent and Executive Director of RISE Charter Schools in Atlanta. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for having me, Alan. Wow, I should have you introduce me wherever I go.
Well, this is exciting. Well, help me with this because I didn't know when I visited your school, we didn't talk about this. Did you grow up in Georgia?
I did. Southeast Georgia, close to Florida, Brunswick,
Oh,
Georgia.
interesting.
Yes.
And so that was your family from there?
Yes, my family was from Brunswick, Georgia. My mother and my father from Brunswick, Georgia. My dad was military, so we
Oh,
traveled to Florida from there. And I started my teaching career in Jacksonville, Florida.
oh, doing what?
I was a math teacher. I was a middle grades math teacher for about 5 years, and then I actually went up to high school for 1 year, and that was it, Alan, for me. I could only do 1 year in high school, and I went back to middle school. That's mainly where the most of my experience in education is middle school mathematics.
Really? And some would say that middle school is maybe the hardest.
Whew, that's what I thought until I was in high school. Oh my goodness.
And so what made you think that that's, going to be a good use of your talents?
I was actually inspired, Alan, by my second grade teacher. And at that time, they always say it's one person that just moves the needle or makes the difference. It could be your pastor or your neighbor. It was my second grade teacher, and I would often imitate her after school with my mom. And I would say, sit down, everybody turn your page. And my parents would be like, okay, she's really impressive, right? Because you're coming home wanting to do homework. And she took a lot of time with me. Um, I just felt like at the beginning I was struggling, a struggling student, believe it or not. And it was her way of her teaching style, but she was more personable, and she would come in and she would make us laugh, and school was fun. And so I always remembered her. Even throughout high school, I would call her, and she would answer.
Oh,
And yeah, she was just like a mentor. And at that time in my life during high school and college, I could always go back to her for advice. And then I just kind of looked at her lifestyle and wanted to be similar to her.
mm. And what's her name?
Miss Jean Oliver. I'll never forget it. She passed away recently, but she was the best ever. Everybody, everybody knew her. Every parent wanted their child to be in her class. People would actually relocate to believe it or not because they wanted that grounded education that she was actually implementing in that second grade class. Like we were ready for third grade, no problem.
Mm. And
But
that's a big year. So
yes,
we're ready for that and fourth
yes.
and all that. Well, help me with this. And I always, like the saying that, we succeed on the shoulders of those who go before us. And I love keeping, the good memories alive for people who have influenced us, including, my parents and others. Help me with this. Is there an element of what you learned from Ms. Oliver that's present at RISE Public School?
Yes, tapping into the human part of people and not being so technical. Understanding your environment first. Before you can lead anything, you need to understand who you're leading. And I think Miss Oliver understood that, yes, we were students, but we were students from different backgrounds, different nationalities. And coming into any organization, you have to do your homework. And you've got to be able to identify with the cause and the whomever you're serving. And so I learned that from her. I really did.
Mm. And um, let's see, when you went to Grambling, was that a change for you from where you had been and what you had even gone through with high school?
Yes. So I came from a small town with two high schools and never been away from home. Actually, I traveled the state of Georgia, but never been on an airplane or whatever prior to my first year of college. And so I had a sense of freedom that I've never had at Grambling. So Grambling is one of the top HBCUs, historical black colleges, with Eddie Robinson and Doug Williams. That uh, it was a lot. The football team was winning, and here I am, a newcomer, a freshman. Both of my roommates at the time were seniors. Dads were pilots for Delta, so we were flying everywhere. And so the experience coming from small rural Georgia, although Grambling was rural, um, the academics was a little more challenging as well as the environment. So I had to adapt to studying more because here's the thing, I was one of the top students in my small town, but when you're a small fish in a big town, you've got to study a little harder. So I had to change my ways, my habits of studying in order to fulfill what I needed to do at Grambling State. It was a very, very intellectual but challenging organization academically.
Sure. And making a change like that, particularly on the run when, you're a freshman, everybody knows you, I'm sure, saying hello to you. How do they even know who I am? Everybody knows. So how did you, make such a change, given, what had gotten you success in high school?
Well, I had two senior roommates. So they were about to graduate. So it was almost like having mentors that were roommates, and they would kind of show me different resources about, here's a study hall tutor for free. If you're not good in writing, you can go to the writing lab. And having them, because they had gone through 3.5 years already, having them to be roommates was pretty much a blessing because at first my parents did not want me rooming with seniors. Absolutely not. That was a no-brainer. But because the dormitory that I wanted to actually reside in was one of the better dorms, I had no choice. And so I actually took on their habits and their resources, and they were introducing me to people because one thing about it, everybody has hiccups, is what they used to call them. And the only way for you to be successful is to tap into other people and share your resources. So that's how I was able to adapt, coming from a small town and big Grambling State University, right? But it was, like we say, it was always that person that makes a difference in your life.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, it does sound a little bit like, there's a theme there, which is of um, uh, appreciating that you don't need to make every mistake by yourself, and
Right.
not only taking advantage of mentors, but opening yourself up to that relationship, which isn't natural. If you were a little shy being in the big spotlight there, you might not have said boo. No, the fact is, they made a decision. Oh, that's Celeta. That's somebody I want to invest in with my time. They got so many other things they're doing as seniors in high school,
Right.
college. So there's something there. Well, help me with this, not to go too far forward, but you in your after that stint in high school, in teaching high school, you ended up being superintendent of one of Georgia's lowest performing school systems. Is that right?
Yes. So prior to becoming superintendent in one of the lowest performing bottom 5% school
Mm.
districts in rural Georgia with limited resources, I actually served as support for that same district. And so, working at the Georgia Department of Education in the Office of School Turnaround, I was charged with monitoring school improvement efforts of the bottom low percent of schools, in Georgia. And so I was a turnaround specialist. And what we would do is we would be charged to support those school districts that are not meeting the proficiency levels in all areas. And so, for example, they may not be proficient in the financial pieces of the school system, academics, outreach, compliance, auditing, whatever you name it. And so my major role at Georgia Department of Education, I had about 62 school districts that I was assigned to, and one of which out of 62, 25 that first year made it off the list. And so my second year, I began to push in to the school systems, and Dooley County is the school system's name. It was transitioning. They had about 5 superintendents in 3 years. They were the lowest of the low. They hadn't had a balanced budget in quite some time, and it was hard to recruit and retain teachers because they only had one fast food restaurant there, and you had to travel 15 minutes because it was rural, like cotton fields and everything. And so you had to travel 15 minutes to even get an apartment, 30 minutes. So they were surrounded by two inner city school districts. And so they just couldn't keep teachers or even have the funding to recruit teachers. And so how I got there was the superintendent at the time. Um, she and I, was communicating, and she said, "Could you help me, with teaching and learning?" I had no clue that she was coaching me in, right? I was just like, "Sure, I'll help you." But she actually was coaching me in the position of assistance
I
to support her teaching and learning efforts, which I didn't have a problem with. But after 4 board meetings, she ended up resigning. And then I said, "Okay, what's happening here? Is this like a bad movie or something? Like, is this real?" And so it was real. And so the board couldn't find anyone, of course. And so I acted as interim for 1 year, and then I coached them to do a search. Didn't happen. And so I ended up being that person. And I do understand that purpose and positioning, I guess because I knew them somewhat, but I also knew the kind of work that needed to be done, and everybody can't do it.
Yeah, and the other piece that can be hard is, moving in, and you've done this throughout your career, moving into a spot where there's stakeholders and and even if they acknowledge they're not going doing, as well as they would like, people don't react always in the most way where they're open to, moving forward. So how did you handle that in this fraught experience, albeit your, advice with consulting has been valuable, but nevertheless, all those stakeholders exist.
That was an eye opener for me, like no other. It's one thing to push in and support because you're in and out, but to actually be there day to day, boots on the ground. I think that experience really verified and solidified that I was a true adult. Like this is what real work is about. And I was the first African American female superintendent there. And no one was used to that. I was the first of its kind. And in that particular area was the home of the cotton gins and cotton, right? And so people still thought I was someone from the state that was going to come in. Instead of being the one that's supposed to lead and help, they always said, oh, she's the police of education. That's what they used to call me. And I'm like, no, I'm really here to serve. And so it took me tapping into those people that they believed in to partner with them because I needed allyship, in order to do this. And I knew that I could not do this alone because they were, like you said, coming in, stakeholders were not receptive. They were like, oh no, especially her. She worked for the state. And so I became best friends with the mayor. He and I did everything together. When you saw him, you saw me. And so that kind of helped me. And then that PTA president that everybody knows in the neighborhood, she helped me. She became an ally, the city manager. And so we all formed this task force committee where we actually would do walking tours and visit different business meetings, the Chamber of Commerce, the mayor's monthly meeting, the PTA meeting, and they saw us as a unit instead of me being by myself. And then others started to believe in me, even the staff. And so it was having to circle myself and align myself with people that were already, you know, positional power and people believed in them and their leadership. That's how it happened.
Mm, boy, it wouldn't surprise me that when you came to Rise, similarly, perhaps as a consultant, I think you were senior director of improvement services for Cognia, which is a national school and college accreditation organization, and saw, what was going on there. I'm sure these skills from before in the building of, allyship was helpful.
Yes. Cognia is, I want to say we're in 90 different countries. We have roughly 40,000 schools, millions of students that we support. So I had a chance to support schools on a global level and not just locally. And I also had a chance to learn more about what different best practices were being done in different states like Puerto Rico. But I was assigned to one of the largest school districts in Tennessee, Shelby County Schools. And I was assigned to what they call the Fraser community, where it's really tough, right? And I was there for the course of 3 years and I learned so much. I learned a whole lot. And I'll tell you, the two schools that I was assigned to, they made it off the list last year, and they've
Mm,
been on the list for 13 years. And so it was a big article and everything. We got a chance to talk to the Senate. But having to say that, I felt like I was making a difference in Tennessee and I was passing these little schools every day that they needed the same kind of support. So I was getting on a plane to support efforts of other states, but they needed me right here, in Georgia. And so my focus was shifting a little bit, because I kind of felt guilty. I was like, I'm making a difference in Tennessee and I live right here. And
right.
so, you know, and so Rise didn't know the background of Rise at all. I just knew that someone had reached out for some consulting opportunities. And I said, why not? And it'll give me an opportunity to give back what I've been studying in Memphis and some of those best practices to help, a smaller district because I didn't want to go large with it. I wanted to go small to make a great impact. And so I was a consultant at Rise, wasn't trying to sign on just to support because I knew that around the state of Georgia, I had opened and closed schools, had been a part of, successfully opening schools and successfully closing schools. So I knew that I had the alignment of skill set based on what they needed. And my role was just to help them close without any penalties, never to say, okay, we're going to stay open.
You're not very good at following directions, are you here?
No, I'm not.
No. That, well, before we get into, Dr. Watson as a rebel and a reformer and your leadership style. Let me just take a moment, if I could, to take a break. School Improvement Partnership wants to thank the Charter School Investor podcast sponsor, Herbert J. Sim. From single site charter schools and CMOs, from expansions to startups, Herbert J. Sim delivers innovative and flexible capital solutions that meet your clients' evolving needs through their finance right approach. So, to understand about Dr. Watson's leadership at RISE, um, I believe on February 24, a little over a year ago, 2023, the Fulton County School Board, which is the authorizer of RISE, voted not to renew the charter. So, how did you stabilize the situation?
Um, my first order of business is, and I usually do this, is to research where you support. And so when I arrived here to in the role of the consultant, um, Rise was up against closing a school in a small amount of time. They had to have everything closed by June 30th. So it's already March, you may as well say. So you're saying March, April, May, June to close down things that you've been doing for 5 years, right? That means all your files, finances, textbooks, desks, anything. It was like you would be selling your home and you're having to close in 30 days, right? And so they being Rise, the board chair, and a couple of other supporters helped write a petition to the state charter to become its own LEA. And at that time, I came right in when they were, wordsmithing and doing this. And for me, I was like, perhaps you need to say it this way. Perhaps we need to try this. And then there were me helping push that through, right? And still having to meet the obligations from Fulton County because they were authorized under Fulton. So there were several mandates that they had to adhere to. And so it was a whole process, Alan. Usually people get 12 months to start up a school, and you need that. And so the transition piece, um, keep in mind it was March, April, school ended in May. Teachers were on a 10-month contracts, leaders were on 11-month. So there was nobody there over the summer to help transition because they weren't on contract. So it's like, and so those are things you have to think about, when you obtain a license to open a school. And so it was a lot of work. And so nevertheless, the charter was approved and we were doing two things at one time simultaneously. We were closing the school for Fulton, meeting the deadlines, and opening the school to meet the state deadlines to have a school open within 90 days. And it was four people left on contract, you know. Yeah. So it was a lot of midnight madness. Things that I was used to because I both closed and opened schools before, but not in 90 days.
Mm-hmm.
I've never done it like that. And so I think the time of them being awarded, RISE being awarded to be its own LEA district, was in June of 2023.
May
Well,
30th.
Alan, no one was left to hire in June. Teacher contracts go out in March. So we had 38 vacancies to fill in 3 weeks.
Mm.
38 vacancies in 3 weeks. Four people on staff that were 12-month employees still. All the teachers left because they thought the school was closed because we didn't get approval until June. So, strategically, we had to have a hiring fair, um, making sure that you had money in your account to hire these people. But I've never seen anything like it. But I will tell you, experience and political capital, meaning knowing people that can help you. Um, it's it's going to be key in education to surround yourself around people that know, because you can't do this kind of work by yourself. And so that's what I had to do. I had to reach out to certain people to ask for support. People were volunteering their time to help me interview, get great candidates. The candidates weren't maybe available until the end of July. We had to take them, you know. But I will tell you that this level of leadership, you can't come in and be coached on the job. You have to know how to get in and move the needle, open a school and close the school, know who your resources are and what people can and cannot do during the process. And that's what helped me within my 2 months.
Interesting. Yeah. So because I want to understand your uh, philosophy of leadership, but also um, the and part of it, it sounds like, is inviting, others in to be part of, the team, whether it's on board or in the community, unless I'm missing.
That's exactly right. I think people forget that the school is the community. We are not operating in silos.
Mm.
I don't, every algorithm financially, from your millage rate, right? Taxes, real estate, fuel tax, federal funding, all that depends on how your community is performing, because the money follows um, the number, not always the need. I will say that. And so you may have students that need 100% free and reduced lunch, but if we don't have what we need from the community in the database, they're only going to supply your funding based on what's reported, not the need. And so we are nothing without our community. If the school doesn't perform, the community doesn't perform. And so communicating to your mayors and to the real estate owners and to those that are selling real estate. Hey, if you support me, you'll probably be able to build 5 or 6 new houses. Hey, if you support me, if the school performs, you might open that gas station or community Walmart that you want. And so having those real talks about soliciting people to help you, because we're not alone. Like how we perform is how they perform. And those are the kind of accountable talks that I would have with my community members.
Yeah, yeah, and I noticed. I recall driving around because I took some time before I visited your school a year ago, and gosh, it looked like, the whole, environment there had new houses going up and everything.
Yes.
And I'm not sure it was always that way. Uh,
Yes.
but, I think when, families have a place that they can have confidence in to send their students, it's sort of, it's the first question probably that many families ask.
Right. And for RISE, they had outperformed the neighboring schools pre and post COVID. So academically, they were performing. Parents had a smaller classroom size. Parents had, less discipline problems. Parents were able to experience the pride of their students and teachers, right? And just the resources that, the personalized phone calls from teachers, whereas you're in a classroom with 1 to 30 people. No. And they're in the central heart of Atlanta, so they're near most of the field trips and all that, Georgia Aquarium, and they may want to go to the airport, the aviation department at the airport. They're right in the prime location, right? And so even though some parents had to bring their kids to school due to transportation, they didn't mind. We had free aftercare. Most districts, you have to pay for aftercare. It was free. You had free transportation. You know, Kids are engaged in dual learning languages, studying abroad. Like, you're not going to get that in a traditional public school. You
Yeah.
may, but not at that level.
Oh, absolutely. Well, you mentioned COVID, so I'm curious how you feel, and this is sort of in the topic of what lies ahead. So there's no right answers. It's just based on your experience, what you see. But how do you feel the role of public education has changed over the past decade?
The role of education is non-traditional now.
Oh,
We're trying to implement traditional best practices in a non-traditional setting right now. It's not going to work. What we did 10 years ago, and COVID showed us that we had to not operate in the box. We've got to go from traditional teaching to transformational teaching. And that means that we can't be scriptive. We can no longer have those teaching manuals, page 6, 7, 8, because the school may shut down and we may have to go virtual, right? But I think in addition to that, our students are learning differently from COVID. They become more self sufficient. They've had to log on by themselves. They've become true digital learners. And so, how do you take a student that's been on a gadget or a laptop for 2 years and you give them a textbook? So that's what I mean by traditional. So, we have to understand the mental shift, academic shift, and the cultural shift that we as educators and leaders have to transform into our students. Like parents were even teachers, during COVID. They had to make sure the kids logged on, they had modules, but teaching was different. It wasn't stand up in front of the classroom. You had to really be forced to do what they call differentiated learning, where you had different stations in the Zoom classes where they had different classroom activities going on, via Zoom. And so I think COVID opened our eyes up to say there's more to teaching than in the classroom. So there's this thing about learning beyond walls, meaning taking the kids outside, of the classroom because that's where the real world application is. So I think, yeah,
yeah. And a piece of this, it sounds like, and something that your early teacher mentor did. You mentioned that students learn differently, and I think buried a piece in this is it's a system not set up for adults, but for children, and it's more children focused. And just as you acknowledged, you learned differently when you were young. Many children today, add COVID and distance learning and the like, it's probably been, on steroids that those
yes.
differences sometimes get enhanced. So, how does that influence, your approach on public education?
Well, my approach on, well, it's a lot. I think my approach on public education, as you stated, with the COVID and the digital learning and the differentiated learners are learning different. My approach is you have to tap into every child. You'll probably hear me say something about personalized learning.
Yeah.
And when you personalize or customize something, you've really got to drill down to what the student needs. And so we have all these cliches about the whole child and, but are we really, it's like a prescription. If you had a cold and I have a cold, we may have a different prescription. It has to be personalized. And so every child deserves their own prescription of life, right? And if we are not equipped to do that, they're just coming to school every day, whether it's digital or in the classroom, because we're not feeding them or giving them the vitamins in which they need to be successful. So my approach has always been data driven and drilling down to the child, not so much of the test, right? Drilling down to the child needs. Every test, they have a test like every quarter, and they still are at level one. So what is it that this child needs, right? For example, there are four domains: spatial geometry, plane geometry. Then you have number sense and operations, and statistics and probability. I had a student that he didn't need all four domains. He was great at the other three, but he just did not know geometry. So here I am teaching 5 weeks of something that he didn't need. He knew that. And so when it was time for him to take the test, he was still failing because I did not personalize it. I did not drill down to what he needed for him to be successful. And so we've got to understand, in order to move schools and move students, and we say move the needle, education to me has to be more personalized for the student.
With that, we come to my final question, which is a reference to my favorite author of the moment, Abraham Verghese, who wrote Cutting for Stone, and in addition to a couple other books. But he gives this quote: "You live life forward, but understand it backward."
Wow.
What is it that you understand now as a leader in the charter school community that you wish you knew?
Can we have a part two? We need a part two.
Uh,
I understanding the difference between charter and public education. There is a gap in my understanding, funding wise. So I had to learn that in charter, you're wearing about eight hats, where, I mean, in rural Georgia, you do the same, but your teacher may be your social worker, it may be your PTA liaison, right? Because they don't have all the funding sources that your traditional public schools have. And so I wish I had known better with all my big ideas coming in here. Like, I'm still in public education. Um, Being better prepared financially, understanding more financial literacy, how the charter works versus the public schools, and also understanding that the sense of revenue is mainly enrollment and credentialing of teachers, and knowing how to market, be a better marketer. I have this instructional piece down pat on how to move your school, but how to sustain students. I wish I knew, that charter school is about marketing. Charter schools don't have the same financial resources. And there was a gap in my understanding, and I mean, I had a real life lesson this year, because it was a gap in my understanding of the charter versus the public education setting.
Yeah, financially and how they work and how that influences what you can do.
Yes.
Yeah, well, and with all that, you still, manage to attract actually quite interesting, diverse, faculty and the like. Partly with Dr. Nash's help and the like. So it's been incredible that even with all this, as you're learning as you're going, you've really, taken something that you were getting ready to close in 3 months, and instead, arisen from the ashes, an extraordinary school. Well, I did want to draw this talk to a close, but before I did, I really wanted to thank you for being so generous and honest, with your insights and everything. Clearly, you're not just one to talk about all your, successes, of which there are many. But I think we learn from it all. That's part of the journey. Um,
Yes.
and one more time, I wanted to thank our sponsor, Herbert J. Sims. This is what charter school leadership looks like.